In the summer of 2022, Actual Nerds released The Tarnishing of Juxtia, an action platformer that puts players in a beautiful, handcrafted 2D world where they'll need to explore diverse, dangerous environments, fight past huge bosses, and learn from their frequent deaths so they can save a decaying kingdom from a mysterious plague that will lead to its ruin. As players make their way through the game, they'll interact with various characters and read descriptions from various items to learn the history of the kingdom, as well as the story of how it fell to this ruined state, and what they're supposed to do to help restore it. Some of these character dialogues and item descriptions can be hard to find or easy to misinterpret, so with no restraint on spoilers, let's go through all of the information in the game so that we can find out what caused and how to stop the tarnishing of Juxtia. In the beginning, the world was nothing more than clouds of fog roiling in an endless sea. There were no trees. There were no people. There was no life. There was nothing. Nothing except two obsidian spires that grew from the depths of these clouds. Within these obelisks, two beings hatched from giant, brilliant eggs, and after their awakening, they looked out over the desolate world before them. Despite how empty it seemed, they could sense an innate energy everywhere in the clouds, an energy they could also feel within themselves. They soon found that this energy, called specks, could be used and manipulated to create landmasses and structures, and people and creatures. So the two set to work on building great kingdoms of their own on the blank foundations of the world. Juxtia, who emerged from a brilliant golden egg, built a kingdom centered on purity and peace. She crafted beautiful valleys and forests, where the trees gently swayed in a pleasant breeze that carried the sweet scent of flowers and fruit. She crafted beasts and creatures to frolic among the trunks and leaves of these forests. Among them, the large wyverns, which were the beasts that best embodied her purity. The people of her kingdom, named Juxtians, cared for her forests and creatures, always working to ensure that they could live a life in tune with the harmony of nature. From among her most devout followers, Juxtia selected a few to become saints, icons that embodied the values of Juxtia and could help her children stay on the path of her virtues. Orders sprang up around the revered heroes of the Juxtians, like the vigilant border guard of St. Tralnium and the boisterous Templars of St. Obereth. Some of them, like St. Belsmith, were able to achieve the highest honor of the land and bond with one of Juxtia's wyverns, effectively becoming icons of purity that every Juxtian should strive for. Juxtia ruled this kingdom from the peak of her capital, Saintspire, where the sun, whose warm glow was reminiscent of the specks of the goddess, shone upon all of her creations. On the other side of the world, the god known as Drelium raised a kingdom that was the opposite of Juxtia's. After he emerged from his pale blue egg, Drelium created a land of metal and invention, crafting grand metallic halls and vast, intricate machinery that could transport heavy loads with ease. The people of his kingdom, named Drelians, took after the example of their god and became adept mechanics and artisans, creating many wonderful devices, gadgets, and machines, making Drelium's capital of Crescent Peak a site of impressive technological prowess. Despite their predisposition towards machines, Drelians did have an appreciation of nature too, loving the moon and the stars that shone in the Drelian night sky. The moon soon came to be closely associated with Drelium because of the similarity between its light, which was the reflection of the light of the sun, and the specks of Drelium, which didn't glow on their own like Juxtia's did, instead reflecting light that shined upon them with an unmatched splendor. In fact, through using their own ingenuity and the help of their lord, the Drelians grew special plants in Crescent Peak that captured and reflected the light of the moon and the stars, lighting their capital with a wonderful light that was unseen anywhere else in the world. Their experimentation with the specks of their god and the world around them didn't stop there though, as they took a keen interest in the innate energy that surrounded them. Eventually, as groups of interested people worked together, they developed the art of speckcraft, which harnessed specks into brands which could be used to produce magical effects. Wanting to explore this further, the Drellians eventually built a tower in the far east of their kingdom, and through the work of the mages in this tower, many discoveries were made about the nature of specks. Chief among them was the realization that the color of the specks indicated who or what they were associated with. For instance, the brands that were created by or associated with Juxtia took on the radiance that accompanied her specs, and spells created by or associated with Drellium took on the pale brilliance associated with his. The mages also found that the fog sea itself also had specks that they could harness for spells, which took on the hue of gray, reminiscent of the clouds that made up the void. One day, perhaps motivated by the work of the mages of the Dust Spire, by his own vanity, or some other reason lost to time, Drellium decided to see how far he could push his power, and used his specs to create a being unlike any other created by him or Juxtia. He decided to create another god. As the being took shape, the mages of the tower learned that the specs of a god manufactured in this way didn't take on the color of their creator, but took on a new color, the color red. And unlike Drellium or Juxtia, the manufactured god couldn't use their crimson specs to create things. They instead used them to absorb the specs of slain creatures around them, which increased their power and made them stronger. A fierce bloodlust accompanied this power, driving the Red Soul to continually kill more and more people and creatures to grow ever more powerful. As his Red Soul traveled down this path of destruction, stopping at nothing to slake its hunger for more and more specs, Drellium recognized it was a danger to the Twin Kingdoms, and even to himself, as there seemed to be no limit to the growth and power the Red Soul experienced, meaning it could one day overpower him. Fearing that the being could cause irreparable damage to the world, or turn against him, Drellium sealed it away, deep in an underground city, where the world would be safe from its wrath. However, the Red Soul's power couldn't be fully contained, and although it couldn't physically break the bonds of its confinement, the Red Soul called to those that lived in the land above, coming to them in dreams where it pushed them to break open the seal that bound it and unleash it upon the world. As a result, cults centered on Red Souls began to spring up across the land, telling of a prophecy that one day a Red Soul would appear and usher in a complete transformation of the Twin Kingdoms. Most people dismissed this prophecy as fanatical conjecture, especially as the length of time since the Drellian Red Soul crisis went from years to decades to centuries. But there still remained those in the realms that hoped to one day see this prophecy come to life, some of whom worked in secret ways. Following the Drellian Red Soul crisis, peace returned to the Twin Kingdoms, a peace that lasted for centuries. However, as the years passed, there existed a tension between the kingdoms of Juxtia and Drellium due to them being diametrically opposed in nearly every way. And eventually, for a reason lost to time, this tension escalated into a full-blown war. The gods themselves could not partake in the fighting, as close proximity between them would lead to the destruction of them both, so the war was fought by the people of their kingdoms. Led by a trio of siblings known as the Artisan, Speclord Tyrus, and the Diviner, the Drellians married their prowess of speckcraft and metalwork together to create magical war machines that had never been seen before. Machines that were seen as perversions of the purity of the world by the Juxtians, who, armed with simple martial weapons, courage, and faith in their saints, met their foes in the fields below the Drellian capital. The fighting was fierce, and many soldiers on both sides met their end trying to bring glory and victory to their country and their god. After 5 long years of war, the Juxtians found themselves on the brink of victory, having overcome the technological prowess of the Drellians and the loss of most of their ladies' wyverns, who flew across the fog sea at the outset of the war to avoid partaking in the bloodshed. In Crescent Peak, the Drellian siblings, together with their lord, tried to find a desperate last plan that would repel Juxtia's army and turn the tide of the war in their favor. And at that moment, one of Juxtia's revered saints, Saint Hypatia, appeared before them. However, she did not come as a conqueror come to put the final nail in the coffin of Drellium. She came as an ally that offered the chance of salvation that Drellium needed. Having fought on the front lines of the war, Hypatia had seen atrocities committed by the Juxtians in the pursuit of victory for their kingdom. Cruelty that did not line up with the values of peace and purity that they were told to live by their goddess. Thus, unable to reconcile the hate she saw with the pillar of purity she was supposed to be, Hypatia abandoned the ways of Juxtia and defected to Drellium to defeat the hypocritical goddess. When she defected, she stole a very precious resource from Juxtia, Merla, the last of the wyverns of the goddess. The Drellians recognized the rare opportunity before them and immediately set to work experimenting with the specs of Merla. Soon, their work caused a tear to open up in the veil, allowing them to see into the core of the world. Specks of a new color floated in the air, not blue, yellow, or red, but vibrant violet. Hope and wonder rose in them. However, as the purple specks caused bulbous masses with sinuous tendrils to grow in their world, their wonder turned to horror as they realized that what they had created was not a weapon of salvation, but a flaw in reality. It was a tarnishing of the world, and it not only caused cancerous purple growths to spread across the lands, it also inflicted a sickness of mind and body to those unfortunate enough to come across it. While the tarnishing could affect anyone, Juxtians were particularly susceptible to the infection, likely due to it emerging from the experimentation of the specks of a creature of the goddess's own making. None of the Juxtians were safe, not even the precious saints. Saint Oberith and his Templars were infected early on, and underwent grotesque physical transformations, becoming monstrous, insect-like creatures that exploded when killed. Saint Trallium was infected as well, and he tried to stop the tarnishing from spreading to the rest of Juxtia by locking himself and his men in his stronghold, where they slowly lost their minds. But the tarnishing couldn't be stopped, and it spread through the Juxtians' armies and country. Without their leaders and soldiers, Juxtia was forced to pull back from the edge of Crescent Peak and ultimately admit their defeat. Although it had resulted in his kingdom's victory, Drellium felt incredibly guilty about his role in bringing about the tarnishing and withdrew himself to his throne room at the pinnacle of his capital. His final act before doing so was assigning Hypatia, newly bonded with Merla, as Crescent Peak's new High Arbiter, knowing that, due to the righteousness that ran in her heart, she would never wage a counter-war of genocide against the devastated Juxtians, but would defend Drellium against any incursions against the kingdom with her life. The 3 Drellian siblings that were with them at the moment of the tarnishing did not receive a similar blessing, however, and they were banished from the capital city for their role in upsetting the natural order of the world. Thus, the war between the twin kingdoms ended, and although only Juxtia suffered from the ravages of the tarnishing for now, it seemed only inevitable that it would eventually consume Drellium as well, and bring an end to the world as it was known. However, despite their seemingly eventual mutually assured destruction, Juxtia was unwilling to allow her kingdom to be destroyed so suddenly, while Drellium's own got to go on surviving. and while he remained relatively free from the consequences of his actions. So she vowed to one day make him pay for his cruel devastation of her kingdom. It took 5 years after the conclusion of the war, but eventually, Juxtia created the one being that would be able to do what she wished. She created a Red Soul, giving the being a quest of revenge where they were to travel to Crescent Peak, find Drellium, and kill him for all he'd done to Juxtia and her creations. Upon receiving its orders from its creator, the Red Soul set out and soon came across a strange four-armed individual named the Brand Marker. Apparently, the Brand Marker knew of its nature as a Red Soul and mysteriously said that they had been waiting for someone like him, implying they, like Juxtia, wanted to see Drellium receive punishment for what he'd done. After bestowing the Red Soul with the knowledge of Spectcraft and granting them their first brand, the Brand Marker then disappeared, promising to see the Red Soul again throughout their journey. Although somewhat confused by the encounter, the Red Soul refocused and set out to make its way to the kingdom of Drellium, fighting through the tarnished hunters of the Valley of Juxtia and what remained of St. Trallium and his border guards to make it to the siege tunnels that lied between the two kingdoms. Here, the Red Soul pierced the defensive bulwark of the Drellium forces and defeated the corrupted drowned brother that resided in the depths of its waters to complete the first stage of their journey and enter the kingdom of Drellium. In an old Drellian outpost on the borders of the kingdom, they met the Artisan, one of the Drellian siblings that had been exiled from Crescent Peak, who set up a smithy in this outpost after being banished from his home. The Artisan had sealed up the way further into Drellium, but upon meeting the Red Soul, agreed to open the gates barring the way. The Red Soul continued on, fighting their way through the scavengers and the Drellium soldiers that remained in the war wastes, and climbing a tall tower, where at its top, they met High Arbiter Apathia. Apathia had caught wind of the Red Soul's journey of revenge, and, as was her duty, vowed to stop them, proving her resolve by quickly defeating them in battle. Triumphant, Apathia then grabbed hold of their limp body, and after telling the Red Soul to reconsider the path they were walking, threw them from the tower. Although Apathia had expected that to be the end of her foe, the Red Soul was incredibly resilient, and an old Juxtian healer, Matron Dakar, came across their battered body and brought it to the remains of her clinic, where she nursed them back to health. While regaining their strength, the Red Soul learned from Matron Dakar that she actually saw St. Obrith at the outset of his infection, but couldn't do anything to help him. She and her healers had sealed him and his tarnished Templars up in an old temple close by, but they had been assaulting them over the years, constantly filling her clinic with bodies. Hearing the difficulty that the matron was going through, the Red Soul decided to help her and made their way through the swarming hamlet, clearing out the infected Templars and bringing the torment of St. Obrith to an end. While this effort seemed like a distraction from their main goal, the Red Soul actually found it proved a useful detour, as behind the hamlet, they found the junction of Drellium, which had pathways to many other places in the kingdom, including to Crescent Peak. Unfortunately, the elevator that would carry them to the capital was powered off, so the Red Soul returned to the Artisan, who, upon hearing they wanted to go to the capital, explained that the key that powered the elevator had been split up and hidden in areas where only the most trusted Drellians could find them. Knowing his brother, Speclord Tyrus, held one of the pieces of the seal and had returned to Dust Spire after he was banished, the Artisan directed the Red Soul to the tower, giving them a key that would allow them to access it. As for the other pieces of the seal, he didn't know where they were, but he knew of someone in the Verdant Gardens that did, telling the Red Soul to meet with them to learn more. With that, the Red Soul set off, and after having a brief meeting with a brand marker, made their way to the top of Dust Spire, where they found that Speclord Tyrus did not share in the same helpful disposition as his brother, forcing the Red Soul to kill the mage in order to get the first piece of the seal. They then moved to the Verdant Gardens, where they met the third Drellian sibling, the Diviner. After cryptically rambling for a moment, the diviner agreed to help the Red Soul and told them where they could find the other 2 pieces of the seal that would power the elevator to the Drellian capital. With this information, the Red Soul was able to collect what they needed from the Queen of Drellium and her guardian in the Verdant Gardens, and from the Sister of Reverence of a Red Soul cult that had taken over the Drellian ossuary. With all of the pieces of the seal collected, the Red Soul returned to the artisan, who put the seal back together again, which allowed the Red Soul to go to the junction and take the elevator up to the capital. But before reaching the Lunar City, Apathia, mounted upon Merla, landed on the platform. Just as before, knowing what the Red Soul desired to do, Apathia attacked them, determined to prevent them from reaching her lord. However, this time, the Red Soul, who had grown extensively in their journey throughout the land, was able to overcome Apathia and defeat her in battle. But before the final blow could be struck, Apathia flew off on Merla, promising that they would meet again. With the High Arbiter out of the way, the Red Soul continued their ride and made it to their destination, the Drellium capital of Crescent Peak. The city was a shadow of its former self, with most of the regular populace having fled the capital as a result of the war. The only remnants were the Drellian Guard, who futilely tried to stop the Red Soul from invading their city, and the nobles, who were engaged in a never-ending party of sadistic sport, where they attacked, maimed, and killed people, all in the pursuit of a night of entertainment. They even set up an arena where they could watch these killings take place, and where accomplished fighters would be celebrated for their prowess and murder. The current champion, Laurentino, had a particularly stellar reputation as being unbeatable. But he had never faced off with a god before, and after having to take a detour to get into more acceptable attire, the Red Soul defeated the arena's champion and was granted access to Drellium's Palace of Secrets. Here, they met Apathia once again, who, in a final stand, vowed to stop the Red Soul from reaching Drellium. The two then engaged in a fierce fight where Apathia launched her most devastating attacks upon the Red Soul, and was even assisted in the battle by Merla, who gored the Red Soul with her metallic horn and crushed them under her talons. But despite the power of the two, the Red Soul, being so close to achieving their goal, so close to getting revenge for their creator, tanked the attacks of the two and cut down Apathia, killing the saint that betrayed their goddess. With the traitor's defeat, the path to the throne room was now clear. The Red Soul made their final climb up the Palace of Secrets, coming out over the dark storm clouds that surrounded its peak to a clear night sky where Drellium, the god of the moon, watched the stars. As he looked upon the magnificent lights that hung in the heavens, he reflected on their nature, and then asked the Red Soul to do a reflection of their own, to reflect on Juxtia and her character, to question the path she had set them on. Drellium told the Red Soul that it was one they didn't have to walk, that they had the power to choose another. But if they chose to continue down the path of revenge, then he would defend everything he and his kingdom had created to the death. Despite Drellium's request, the passionate fire of Juxtia's vengeance that had driven them to do everything they had done thus far pushed the Red Soul to approach and then start a fight with the god. Drellium used the full extent of his power upon his challenger, using his crescent-shaped blade to make wide, sweeping slashes at the Red Soul, using his spectcraft to smite them with the might of the moon. But to his dismay, the Red Soul absorbed all of these attacks and kept coming. Having absorbed the specks of so many creatures in their journey across the land, the Red Soul's power now surpassed Drellium's own. And despite the god fighting for the hope of his kingdom and all his creations, he was slain by Juxtia's Red Soul, paying the price for unleashing the Tarnishing upon her. With his defeat, Juxtia was able to rally her armies together again and conquer his kingdom. Finding that while she was unable to stop the Tarnishing, she could, at the very least, contain it, meaning the biggest threats to her realm were dealt with. Now, there was only one more to address. Despite all that the Red Soul had done for her, she deemed it too dangerous to allow it to continue to exist. She didn't have the power to destroy it, not after it had absorbed so many specks, but she still held command over it, and she commanded it to sleep. Thus, the Red Soul was sealed away, sharing the fate of its kin and leaving its true purpose in the world, as told by the prophecy, unfulfilled. However, this wasn't the ultimate fate of the Red Soul, as a path they actually took ended in a way in which they were able to make the Red Soul prophecy come true, and the path to that end lied with the woman known as the Diviner. When the Red Soul met the Diviner in the Verdant Gardens, they found that, just like the brand marker before her, she appeared to have an idea as to the true nature of the Red Soul, and apparently had another plan in mind for the being. Instead of being used to get revenge against Drellium, the Diviner hoped the Red Soul could be used to save the kingdoms from the Tarnishing. To do that, they would need to open up the way to Crescent Peak, so the Diviner gave them the locations of the final two pieces of the seal, which the Red Soul easily collected. When they returned to the artisan to get the seal put back together, the craftsman asked them for a favor before he handed the sigil over. He asked them to keep an eye on his sister, as she intended to return to the city, something he knew would be incredibly dangerous. Indeed, when the Red Soul met with the Diviner a few moments later, she admitted she was heading to the city to meet with the Society of Mages she used to lead, explaining that they held an object of extreme importance. There was a risk that the mages would react with hostility to her reappearance, so she asked the Red Soul to retrieve the object themselves should something bad happen to her, as the object they held was one that the Red Soul needed in order to fulfill their destiny. After fighting their way past Apothea and coming to Crescent Peak, the Red Soul came upon the moment that the Diviner met with her former colleagues. And just as she feared, they did not take kindly to her reappearance, sentencing her to seeing it as payment for her past crimes. The Red Soul gave chase, but was too late. By the time they found the Diviner again, she had been transformed into a monster, a result of being forced to look upon the gaping hole in the veil that was the source of the Tarnishing. Driven insane by her transformation, the Diviner attacked the Red Soul, forcing them to kill her, thankful that by doing so, they would put an end to her torment before she suffered for too long. Just before dying, the Diviner revealed the full extent of her mistake to them. When she, her siblings, and Drellium brought the Tarnishing into existence, it not only infected and marred the creations of Juxtia, it infected Juxtia herself, corrupting her very being. Only by finding Juxtia's heart where her tarnished avatar lied, and destroying it, could the mistake in reality, the Tarnishing of Juxtia, truly be fixed. It was up to the Red Soul to do this task. However, in their current state, the Red Soul would be unable to do so, as they were still at the command of Juxtia, having been created by the goddess. To solve this, the Diviner directed the Red Soul to go to her brother, saying it was up to him now. And then, her strength left her, and she lied still. The Red Soul then made their way to the artisan, who was heartbroken to hear what happened to his sister. After admitting his own part in the creation of the Tarnishing, the artisan told the Red Soul the only part of his sister's plan that he knew, that there was a long sealed vault that they would need to open and venture within to find what they needed. In the blasted landscape of the war wastes, past vigilant Drellian weapons that seemed posted to prevent something's escape, the Red Soul found the sealed vault. To open it, they needed two sigils, One they found in Crescent Peak, it being the important object that the diviner spoke of that was held by the mages of the city. The other they found on an altar in Light Grove, protected by a fierce Drellian automaton. With these two sigils conjoined into one, the door that had been sealed for centuries opened, and the Red Soul ventured within. They stumbled their way through the dark red glow of the vault, descending further and further down into its darkness, until coming to a wide lake of blood. Here, they met the only being in the world that could ever hope to match them in power. They met the unspeakable Queen, the Red Soul of Drellium, who had been locked up here centuries ago to save the world from its wrath. Still as bloodthirsty as ever, the Queen attacked its kin, using its bright red blades to cut them down, the mastery of specs to launch lasers and balls of energy at their foe. However, the Red Soul was able to dodge past or absorb these attacks and counter with attacks of their own. Upon meeting such fierce resistance, the Queen unleashed her true power, sprouting great red wings and releasing a burst of energy that brought the Red Soul to the brink of death, launching waves of lasers upon them to blast them from existence. But the Red Soul managed to survive the onslaught and continue their attacks. Eventually, the Red Soul of Juxtia cut down the Red Soul of Drellium, bringing an end to the Queen's warpath. Just past the battle site, they were surprised to meet Drellium, who thanked them for bringing an end to his Red Soul and ending their torment, acknowledging that only they had the power to do so, but then questioned what they were doing here. The Red Soul wondered themselves, and then remembered the words of the diviner and the artisan, that there was something here that they needed to fulfill their purpose. They continued through the vault, coming to a strange ethereal void. Light blue platforms appeared before them, giving them a way to cross the chasm, and at its end, they came upon the remnants of a large light blue egg, the birthplace of Drellium. They picked up a piece of the eggshell, wondering what purpose the diviner had in sending them to this sacred place, then figured the answer would come to them if they found Juxtia's birthplace. Eventually, after buying a key from a vendor in the courtyard that opened a locked door in the siege tunnels and crossing another ethereal void, although this time with golden platforms, they found the birthplace of Juxtia. And upon picking up a fragment of Juxtia's shell, the brand marker appeared before them. Apparently, collecting the fragments of the shells of the gods was a test that the brand marker had been waiting to be done by a Red Soul for centuries. A test that the diviner was aware of. And now that the Red Soul had completed this test, they were worthy. The brand marker asked the Red Soul to meet them at the pinnacle of Crescent Peak, then vanished once again. They set out for the Palace of Secrets, and this time, when they met Apothea near the top, she let them go without a fight, recognizing that the Red Soul appeared to be heading down a different path. The Red Soul then met the brand marker at the appointed spot, where the being gave them the choice to fulfill their purpose in the world, to be free from Juxtia's influence, and thus have the ability to destroy her and truly end the Tarnishing. The Red Soul, knowing it was the right thing to do, that it was their destiny to do so, accepted the brand marker's proposition and ascended to godhood. Then they set out and met with Drellium, who, recognizing what the Red Soul now was, that they could do what he could not, opened a portal to Saintspire. As they made their way to Juxtia, the goddess projected illusions of herself before her champion in an attempt to persuade them to stop. But it didn't work, and soon the Red Soul came face to face with their creator. Although disappointed at the path they had now chosen, Juxtia was determined to make Drellium pay for what he'd done. No one was going to stop her, not even the Red Soul. So Juxtia started a battle with the being that was meant to be her salvation. Using her mastery of spectcraft, Juxtia pierced and slashed the Red Soul with vibrant spiritual weapons, and she burned them in giant, brilliant explosions. But it wasn't enough, and she soon succumbed to the strength of her creation. However, before her essence could be absorbed by the Red Soul, a strange power welled up and then exploded out of her, revealing the subsumed progenitor, Juxtia's corrupted heart that was the source of the tarnishing that was consuming the world. The progenitor then continued the attack, throwing cancerous masses of the infection at the Red Soul, or using them to create devastating shockwaves upon the ground, or fire lasers of pure tarnished energy at the being. But the source of their power was also their weakness, as sometimes these masses would stick around after an attack, and the Red Soul found that if they damaged one enough, the progenitor would be weakened to the point where it was open to attack. Sensing the danger they were in, the progenitor unleashed the devastating power of the void upon the Red Soul, trying to smite them with blasts of pure lightning. But even with this amazing ability, the progenitor could not overcome what the Red Soul was now. The Red Soul dodged past the bolts of lightning. They dodged past the lasers and shockwaves. They continued to weaken the progenitor until finally, they defeated the monstrosity, thereby putting an end to the horrors of the tarnishing forever. After overcoming the progenitor, the Red Soul looked upon the land of the Twin Realms from the peak of Saintspire, and realized that the prophecy that told of their arrival was true. Their appearance in the land had put into motion events that forever changed it. They thought about what they should do next. Juxtia's destruction left a void in the pantheon of the world, and it seemed only natural that the Red Soul, now a god themselves, would replace her. But replacing one god with another didn't actually feel like a transformation for the lands. It didn't feel like it was their purpose. Maybe they weren't meant to stay here. Maybe they were meant to travel the world and bring change to other kingdoms that could exist in it. After all, while the Twin Realms seemed like they were the only places of order within the chaotic clouds of the Fog Sea, there were beings that the Red Soul had met in their journey that implied the world was much wider than it appeared, like the Weaveress, who hinted at a new, different world existing beneath the Twin Kingdoms, and the Brandmarker, who did not hail from the Twin Kingdoms, and hinted that the Red Soul could one day follow them into their homeland. Whatever they decided to do next, one thing was for certain. That adventure would be a new chapter in their story, as the story of the Tarnishing of Juxtia had come to its end. It's a story that shows the dangers of revenge, as when Juxtia started on her hate-fueled quest of vengeance, she ultimately created the tool of her own destruction. And yet, it's her very destruction that leads to the salvation of the Twin Kingdoms, as her death was the only way to stop the Tarnishing. An ironic twist that was pretty compelling. It's just a shame that it was Juxtia that had to suffer for Drellium's mistakes, as that makes the twist feel unfortunate instead of justified. Nevertheless, Actual Nerds did a fantastic job building the lore of their world and placing it throughout their game. Hopefully, they can build off the very solid foundation they built with the Tarnishing of Juxtia and make some great games for years to come. I'd like to give a special thank you to the developers and their publisher Mastiff for providing me with an early copy of the game in order to make this video. It was a great opportunity and I enjoyed playing the game and getting to unravel the story. I think I did a good job of presenting it all, but if you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer them. Before I go, I'd like to thank MofoMan123 for their donation to the channel. Not expected at all, but very much appreciated. And I'd like to give a shout out to my little boy Kieran. I love you, buddy. I hope I'm making you proud. Alright, that's everything. So, until next time, thank you for watching and see you later.